there. Welcome to Second Star's latest video. So what we're going to be bringing you for our next couple of sessions is actually information based on the musical Matilda. Now, Matilda actually started off as a book written by Roald Dahl. So what I thought I would do before we teach you a little bit about Matilda the musical is teach you a little bit about Roald Dahl, the author himself. So I'm a teacher, I'm a librarian in Howard County, and I absolutely love Roald Dahl. He's probably one of my very favorite authors ever in the world. A lot of people think his name is Ronald, but it's not. It's Roald, which is a little bit of an interesting name to pronounce, but just a little bit of background about him and how he got his amazing ideas for all of his stories. First of all, besides Matilda here, you may recognize his name from things like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the BFG. Those have all been turned into movies. James and the Giant Peach, that has been turned into a movie as well. The Witches, again, turned into a movie as well. So a lot of his books are extremely popular and have become major things out there in the film world. Personally, my very favorite story is probably one of his shortest stories called George's Marvelous Medicine. I highly recommend that. It has not been turned into a movie or a musical, but it's very short and it's pretty good for kids of all ages. So, a little bit of background about Roald Dahl himself. So, he was actually not born here in America. He is a British author. He was born in Wales in 1916. So, we're talking over 100 years ago. Now, his parents actually weren't Welsh. They weren't British at all. They were actually Norwegian. They moved to Wales for Mr. Dahl, Roald's father's job. So he would often go back and spend his summers with his grandparents in Norway, where his parents met and got married and then moved from. So a lot of his story ideas are a little bit kind of strange, some people might think. And a lot of them actually come from his summers when he would go and spend time in Norway with his grandparents. Now, I do have to tell you something about Roald. So he was extremely mischievous his entire life, not just when he was a young boy, but throughout his entire life. He loved playing pranks on people. He loved playing tricks. When he was a student, he often got into trouble. I'll talk about that in a minute. But when asked about what his very first memories and favorite things were, he remembers riding a bike as fast as possible with his two sisters and his parents screaming at him to slow down, and he would just laugh a crazy laugh and just keep going. So I think that's a pretty interesting fact about him. It kind of says a lot, that he was adventurous and mischievous and loved to cause trouble. Well, something kind of sad happened to Roald when he was 4. His father actually passed away. Now, throughout his entire life, it was his father's wish for his children to go to a proper English school. So that is what his mother decided that she would do. She would send her children to a proper English school to learn proper English ways. So he ended up sent to Landreth Cathedral School, which kind of was unfortunate for him. So he often got into trouble because he was that mischievous troublemaker, and back then when he was in school, the teachers were allowed to kind of punish you in ways that you're not really allowed to punish in schools anymore. So yes, his teachers would hit him. That happened often, and you would think that would deter him from causing trouble, but no, he just kept doing it anyways. Eventually, his mother moved him to a different school called St. Peter's Boarding School. So he actually lived at St. Peter's. That's what a boarding school is. You actually live there. So you go to your classes, you live there. So he didn't like it. His mother moved him again. His third school was called Repton. Now, this is still a school that is in England and it has very, very reputable reviews and things like that. And even though Roald hated school in general, he admitted that Repton wasn't as terrible as the other two. So he often says that things were rules, rules, and more rules, and that his school was filled with days of horror, and he got a lot of his ideas actually from the trouble that he caused with his friends at school. Specifically, Matilda and the mean adults, those were all based on teachers that he actually had. So he was not a very good student. It was pretty much because he really didn't apply himself or really didn't try. But he had wonderful ideas in his head, and his teachers would often tell him, get your head out of the clouds. Why would you think that? Why would you write that? And this is something that kind of stuck with him. He actually has a memoir called Boy, Tales of Childhood. And I think my favorite quote from it was when he was asked about school and what he would like to do, would he like to continue and go on to college? Because he was actually offered scholarships to Oxford and Cambridge, which are two very prominent colleges in England. He said, no, thank you. I want to go straight from school to go and work for a company that will send me on wonderful adventures to faraway places like Africa or China. His family all laughed at that, but what actually happened? Well, Roald really did want to go on adventures to other places. So he actually took a position with the Shell Oil Company. Shell Oil is something that's still out there. If you're driving down the road with your families and you see the Shell Oil, looks like a little seashell, the gas station, that's what he worked for. He actually went to the country of Tanzania, which back then had a different name. So he did that for a while. He went on adventures, but then he really wanted to go and see other places. So in 1939, he decided he was going to join the Royal Air Force of Britain. So he did, and they sent him to Kenya, and he served as a fighter pilot in World War II. Now, he was a wonderful pilot, but something actually happened to him that was kind of interesting. He loved being a pilot. He loved going on adventures. He loved serving his country. But he actually was involved in a plane crash. Luckily, he survived, but he had traumatic brain injury, so he kind of was offered an honorable discharge from the military, which means that although he was wonderful at his job, because his plane had crashed and because he had damage to his brain, they were not going to let him serve in the military or especially fly anymore. So they offered him a different job. They said, would you like to be one of our ambassadors to the United States of America? So it's kind of called an attaché. So he was a technical expert who advised the government representatives both in England and in the United States. So he moved here. Now, when he moved here, he kind of wasn't quite sure of what he was going to think of America, but he ended up liking it an awful lot, and he stayed for quite some time. And he ended up, because he was kind of popular and he was very good with speaking and made a lot of friends very easily, he ended up meeting a very famous actress. Her name was Patricia Neal, and she's been in lots of commercials and other things, and she completely fell in love with him. So Roald Dahl decided to give up his position in Washington and moved to Hollywood, where they married and they had 5 children. Roald's job was to be a stay-at-home dad. So that's exactly what he did. He stayed at home while his wife, the actress, made movies and TV shows and all of these other amazing things. And on the side, he would write articles for magazines and newspapers, and he did well with that. But kind of becoming a writer was a fluke accident. How it actually started was his children would ask him for bedtime stories. And Roald admitted that children are highly critical and they lose interest quickly. And the stories that were out there at the time that you would buy, the actual books that were in bookstores that your mother and father might read to you for bedtime, well, they were horribly boring. Horribly boring. There was no adventure to them, no imagination, nothing. So Roald said, and I quote, "You have to keep things ticking along, and if you think a child is getting bored, you must think of an idea that will jolt them back to the story. You have to know what children like." So he used his own childhood and his own adventures, and of course he did add some twists and turns and a lot of make-believe to those, but a lot of his ideas that he came up with for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, George's Marvelous Medicine, the BFG, the Witches, all of these stories were things that have a root somehow based on something that actually happened to him. So eventually, he's a stay-at-home dad. He's making up these wonderful stories. His children love them. They are actually excited to go to bed in the evenings because they know that their father is going to tell them some amazing stories. Well, he had this brilliant idea of, well, perhaps I should do something with some of these stories. So in 1943, he wrote his very first children's book called The Gremlins. Though This was actually based on an idea of when he was a fighter pilot, because there would be all of these crashes and no one could really say, was it pilot error? Was it something else? So Ron would tell all of his military fighter pilot friends that what it actually was strange gremlin creatures that lived in the engine that would cause your plane to crash. Well, he took that idea of the joke that he told his friends and turned it into a story that was published in 1943. And in the 40s and 50s and even 60s, he continued to write stories for grown-ups and for children, and he actually won the Mystery Writers of America Award, and he won the Edgar Allan Poe Award. One kind of sad thing that happened is his marriage to Patricia Neal ended soon after his children were about mid-aged. He had a great relationship with her still, but with her schedule of being an actress and him being a stay-at-home dad, they really didn't see each other all that often, so they grew apart. He did end up remarrying, and his family kind of now has his estate, and they grant rights to things so that we can have books, we can have shows like Matilda, we can have movies like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We can have all those things thanks to his family. So anyways, that's just a little bit of information about him. I hope you learned something fascinating. The biggest takeaway that I want you to get from this video is that Roald Dahl was a very fascinating man. He had a lot of adventures in his life. And the fact that he actually used parts of his memories of his childhood to create these characters and these settings and these amazing stories is pretty remarkable in and of itself. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more videos where you're going to be focusing specifically on Matilda. Maybe you'll be learning some dances and some other things. Thanks again for joining Second Star for these at-home videos for you. Have an amazing day.